Guys kind of in that same situation, looking to send some guys out. Boy, this is the real after lunch crowd. I'm not getting any response here. All right. This changes my whole approach. That's all right. I've got a juggler coming out in just a minute. It's going to shake you guys up. We're good? Okay. Well, this is the breakout on developing leaders. This, I think, would be helpful if you're a church planter or you want to develop church planters. Let me give you a little bit of background so you know who in the world I am. My name is Bob Franquiz. I pastor Calvary Fellowship in Miami, Florida. We started just over 12 years ago. It was my wife and I and 5 people in the living room, and God's blessed since that. That was about 8 of us. No, it's gone well. God's blessed. It's been amazing. We came out of Calvary Chapel of Fort Lauderdale, so I served on staff as an assistant pastor there for several years before being sent out to start the church in Miami. And one of the things that there's so many things that I'm grateful for about what God's done in our church, but one of the things in particular is that every person that we've brought on staff in all 12 of our years and all that have come from within. And so we've created a leadership process, a discipleship process that I believe is so important for churches to have. I work with like hundreds and hundreds of churches just because I do a lot of coaching and things like that. And so in working with churches, one of the things that I get emails from guys say, hey, I'm looking to hire a fill in the blank. Can you help me out? Can you let some guys know? And I'll always respond like, yeah, if it comes up, I'll let you know. But who's in your church? Oh yeah, we don't have anybody. And I'm like, why? Tell me about how you develop leaders. Well, next question. Pass. The thing about, and we're going to get into this whole thing, but I would just kind of by way of introduction, leadership development, raising up guys, is a very easy thing to neglect. It's an area of ministry that will not scream for your attention. It's an area of ministry that you don't realize that you have a leadership shortage until it's actually happening. And as you're looking at sending out guys, having them plant churches, as you're looking at even just raising up staff members, elders, deacons, ministry leaders, we've got to start that from the beginning. And so when someone is a new believer, how do we do that? And for us, the kind of the pendulum from organic to strategic, I would certainly say my pendulum leans more towards strategic. It's just the way that I'm wired. I'm a bit kind of analytical. I like to think about how things work and how they can work better. So when we started, I always thought of, you have a guy that is a mature believer, he's a leader, he's an elder, he's potentially an assistant pastor, he's a church planner. He has that. Imagine that person in your mind. And then I had this other picture, and I remember I did this at a staff meeting, and I had that picture. I put all those characteristics on one side of a dry erase board, and then I put on the other side of the dry erase board, unsaved person walks in for the first time. And I said, here's what we have to do. We have to connect that with that. And we have to somehow work into this as to how it happens. And, some guys call it, you kind of reverse engineer it, and that's, it may seem, that's kind of like, sounds very $6 Million Man-ish. But regardless, we have to think through how do we develop people and bring them to maturity. And think through even levels or stages. Kind of for me, as we put together our leadership development process, kind of the theme for us is 1 John 2. I write to you, little children. I write to you, young men. I write to you, fathers. 3 stages of spiritual development, growth, and maturity. And we need to think through, and I just got done teaching 1 John. I spent all summer teaching 1 John. And one of the things that we looked at when we talked about this was, some of you are here and you're in the little children stage. That's okay. You just came to know the Lord. You're a new believer. It's wonderful. The challenge is don't stay there. Some of you are in the young men stage, and we talked about all those things. You're fighting the battles, you're growing, you're doing this. Some of you are in the fatherly stage, and you're now being a mentor and a spiritual father to others. And I look at that as we do leadership development is, how do we take these, maybe what we would call pre-little children, those who haven't known that, as 1 John 2:12, write you little children because your sins are forgiven. They don't know that yet. They haven't made that decision yet. The Spirit of God hasn't done a work in them yet. So how do we do that? So anyway, I want to do this as we get started. I want to give you 4 overarching principles about leadership development, about raising up church planters, about raising up staff members, whatever you want to call it. Because I think guys get to a certain level, and it's really it's not a matter of maturity. It's a matter of gifting and calling. So whether someone is going to be a deacon, elder, ministry leader, staff member, church planter, it's none of this is really about, well, do they know the word? Are they mature? Are they kind of qualified in a 1 Timothy kind of way? It's not a maturity issue. It's a gifting and calling issue. So let me just give you these kind of 4 overarching principles. The first one is this: a healthy church raises up leaders. I work with a lot of churches across denominational lines, so I do a lot of work. The Southern Baptists bring me in. I work with a lot of the Southern Baptist church planners, and and one of the things that I'll talk to them about, and sometimes guys, not just in Southern Baptist circles, but sometimes guys just get enamored with a kind of just a purely attractional model, where it's like we're bringing out the dancing bears every Sunday, and it's just something wild that we're doing that kind of draws people in. We had a church down the street from ours. The pastor is an absolutely wonderful guy, but he dressed up like Spider-Man, and he came down like from they shot him out of a cannon or something. No way. And so they did this whole thing, and this is a true story, by the way. And but it's this whole thing. But see, the problem is, and this is kind of my pushback on these guys that I really care about. And I'm not telling you this because I think sometimes we're guilty of building the straw man, knocking them down. Oh, they're so dumb. And said, there's a philosophy here. These guys really, really love the Lord. They really care about people that are lost. But because there isn't a commitment to teaching God's word, there isn't a commitment to seeing that those who are unsaved reaching a place of maturity once they get saved, what happens is that they don't raise up leaders. They simply attract converts. And then, because there's no process, now it's like, well, how do we deal with all these people? Well, now we've got to go and hire people off from other churches and just kind of like pick off their staff and have them join our team. And I talk to guys, in settings like this, and I'll get a little bold at times, and I'll say, if you don't develop your own leaders, you aren't really a church. You may be something else and all that, but listen, as churches, and I know that I'm preaching to the choir, right? Just indulge me for a moment. At the very church, we need to be good at evangelism and discipleship. We could be horrible at a lot of things, but at the very core of what we do as churches, evangelism and discipleship has to be at the center. And these are the things that we have to excel in. And that's why I believe that health in a church is someone coming to your church, getting saved, and then growing to a place of maturity in your church. That they don't have to actually, well, I can only grow to a certain level here, and then I've got to go somewhere else to really kind of hear the stuff that I'm not getting. And so this is part of being a church is developing people, and this is my frustration with and these are friends of mine that are do kind of a multi-site strategy. Fine with that if that's your persuasion. But their strategy for staffing them is hiring pastors who had led churches and it maybe didn't go so well, and so they bring in those guys to lead their multi-site. And I'm saying, okay, So we don't have enough leaders. Let's start another campus that now creates a greater leadership deficiency. So we're going to bring in a guy to now fix that. And it's like, eventually we end up with the same problem, and that is we haven't raised up leaders. We've got to raise up leaders. And if we want to plant churches, we've got to raise leaders. And the second thing I want to tell you that's foundational is that leaders should be developed at all levels. They should be developed at all levels of your church. You should be developing leaders at the most basic levels. So let me give you an example. You have a person who says they want to start serving. Wonderful. You know what you could do? They're a new believer. We would love for you to stand at the door, not stand at the door, knock, but stand at the door and just hand out bulletins. All right? At our church, there's 2 rules to be a greeter. You got to be able to smile. You got to have all your teeth. Those are the 2 rules. Okay? That's just a joke, by the way. They don't have to smile. But here's the thing: is that so you have someone that serves as a greeter. But what we want to do is we want to have someone on that particular Sunday that's overseeing all of the greeters. And we've got greeters in different parts of our ministry. Different doors are coming in. And so, there's to be several people that are serving in a greeter capacity. We want there to be someone who's responsible for all of the greeters. So if there is a problem, we can talk to them and they'll correct it. So if you can imagine, I'm a really, really big baseball fan. I grew up in Boston, so I'm a Red Sox fan, so I was not as big of a fan this year. But generally speaking, I'm a big baseball fan. Although those of you who are Dodgers fans, I thank you for taking all those bad contracts from us. So we owe you one. Anyway, so imagine if you can think through, and I talk about this all the time, is thinking of your church like a farm system, where you've got single A, double A, triple A, and kind of major leagues. I know if you take it too far, the thing breaks down, and then you get superstars and all that. We're not doing that. We're just talking about a couple of different levels. Remember, little children, young men, fathers. So that's kind of the idea. So if you can imagine with me, we have someone serving as a greeter. That is an A-level ministry. It's you don't have to have tons of theological training. You're just serving as a greeter. You're handing out bulletins. You're being welcoming. You have the gift of hospitality. Double A is what we would consider the person who is in charge of that team of greeters. And the way we do kind of our thing is everyone serves on a rotation. So everyone isn't serving every week. And by the way, if you have one of the challenges that people have with serving is, well, man, I want to start serving, but what does that mean? And it's like, well, you're serving every week, every service until Jesus comes back. And that's why some of your folks are praying for the rapture so fervently. They just want a Sunday off. And so we work on a rotation. So like for greeters, you're on one, off one. We serve twice a month. And so that double A would be that one person that is overseeing the greeters that morning. There's 2 teams, so we've got 2 double A people. There's a person in our context, by the way, this is all volunteer, of course, that oversees that area of ministry, this whole area of hospitality. They oversee that area. Now, this is a person that would be serving at a deacon level, level of responsibility. They're trusted, they're tested. And then, of course, there's at some level, there's a staff overseer. So if you can imagine, the kind of deacon level person is the AAA person. The staff member would be, we would call it at the majors level. And so now the point is this, is that there needs to be leadership development, training, and investment at every level. One of the things that happens is that, imagine some churches are really good at getting people to start serving. Hey, let's you just kind of let the need be known. You talk about the greatness of servanthood, the model of Jesus, and you say, man, that's awesome. Then you get people say, man, I want that. I want to serve. I want to do this. I want to serve the Lord. The Lord's done so much for me. I want to serve. And so we do fairly well at creating that kind of single A, someone is doing like essentially a task on Sunday. And then sometimes, if we kind of bring in guys, we're doing some of the top level stuff. But there's nothing happening in between. And this is where in most churches, and once again, I'm just speaking from my experience in working with, hundreds of churches every year, this is where the breakdown happens. We've got a guy who's really good at handing out bulletins, but we don't know how to put him in charge. Sometimes what we do is we just, kind of like, well, let's just roll the dice and see what happens. And that's, there's a word for that, which is nightmare, which is usually what happens because we haven't trained the guy to succeed in this position. And so you just want to think about kind of at an entry level, intermediate level, or a big picture level, what is it? What kind of training do they need? And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. The third thing is this. This is 4 overarching principles, and we're going to get into building this leadership system in your church, or leadership development system. The third is this. The senior pastor has to model leadership development. There are some things that can be delegated. Leadership development is not one of them. And I would even agree that you can delegate some components of leadership development, but you cannot be totally out of it. When we first started our church, I was involved at every level. Guys came to my house. When we first started our church, we didn't have offices. We were meeting in a hotel conference room. And so every Saturday morning, I had guys come to my house, and my wife would make everybody this huge breakfast, and then I would talk about leadership, and we would talk about servanthood, and we would talk about leading people and all of this, and that's kind of how we began this leadership development process. I was involved in every aspect of it. Now, we have an assistant pastor that handles most of that, and my role is really just when they get to kind of that AAA level, AA, AAA, kind of investing in them, talking about leadership, talking about character, talking about philosophy, values, things of that nature, and then like some specialized skills in what it is that they're learning. And so, but there's some things that as the senior pastor that only you can share. And that's one of the things that we've learned in a leadership development process is that I was able to pull out of some of it, but when we got to the top level guys, the guys that we believe had the greatest potential, that is the guys that we thought were going to be, that were elder material, that were staff member material, that were church planter material, these are the guys that I needed to invest in. And so, so the senior pastor has to model it, and then here's the fourth one, and then we'll really get into this. And that is that leadership training equals discipleship. We actually don't distinguish between the two. We really believe that we know there's basics that people need to learn. We do new believers. Our church is really in many ways just like a connection of, dozens and dozens of small groups that meet that are 15 or 20 people that, we're all connected. But so we spend a lot of time training small group leaders, and that's part of this big push for us, leadership training, discipleship. We're not just giving people information. In the beginning, we are. You need to know what it means to be saved, how to pray, how to study the Bible. These are just some of the basics of the faith. Once we move beyond that, what we would maybe call the elementary principles, we start incorporating leadership training, because for us, once again, serving is not this. That's not an advanced class in the faith. That's basic, and so. Our goal is, once someone comes through our new believers class, which is a 4-week process, and they've attended the church for a couple of months, we want to get them involved doing something. Once again, they're not teaching Bible studies, they're not filling in for me on Sunday, but they're doing something. Because one of the things that we know, and you guys know this to be the case, is that the real blessing doesn't come from somebody, being an usher or serving in children's ministry, or setting up or tearing down or setting up chairs. The blessing is in the group of people that they serve with. And there's some iron that's sharpening iron that happens as they're doing it. There's this fellowship that happens, friendships that are formed, that now is what leads to maturity. Because I think all of us, and we talk about this on our staff all the time, that there are kind of catalytic moments that really propelled our faith. You know, there was an experience that happened. Usually, you know, you got saved, and I know for me it was when my older brother shared the gospel with me in his kitchen. I was 19 years old, and I was just confronted with the gospel, and the girl I was dating, who's now my wife, you know, we both responded at the same time. And so there's that. There's, you know, pivotal circumstances that are just these catalytic moments in our lives. But there's also strategic decisions that are made, and we don't even realize that they're strategic decisions, but they're really important decisions that we've made. And most of the time, if you look at someone's life, say, well, what happened in your process from infancy to maturity in Christ? Inevitably, there's part of the story that says, well, I decided to get involved. I decided to do something at church, and man, that's when it took off. So that's why we do not extricate leadership, training, and discipleship, or service and discipleship. We put those things together because we just believe that if we separate the two and we make discipleship only academic, people are going to miss something. Because we're not trying to, you know, create theological elephants who just sit around and do nothing. Instead, we're doing our very best to, you know, do a lot of on-the-job discipleship. People are getting involved. They're asking questions. Man, I was at work this week. They're setting up chairs, and they're having an apologetic conversation about creation while they're setting up chairs. May or may not happen in another context, but they're having this conversation simply because there was this moment. Now, one of the things that is important, especially those of you guys that are kind of, you're on the I know this is the mentor track, but as we talk about discerning guys that have calling to be a church planner, calling for leadership, and even, you know, to be on staff at your church, to plant a church, to go out. You know, a lot of times the road to planting a church, there's a stop on your staff. I know that was the case with us. You know, the last session, my good friend Bill, who's pastoring in Hartford, Bill was on our staff for a couple of years before he went to plant his church. And we knew coming in, and he says, I feel God's called me to plant a church. I just feel like I'm not ready yet. I said, why don't you come spend a couple of years on our staff? And I have a lot of work and very little money. And so we'll work it out, and we'll give you all the training that you need, and then we'll send you out, you know, and we want to be supportive of you and all that. And but I think one of the challenges that for us to discern is people who have that leadership gift, that calling. Because one of the things that happens, well, let me say it this way. I think it's a tragedy when we send guys out who are ill-prepared. And let me just tell you what happens on the other side of that. When we kind of throw spaghetti on the wall, whatever sticks, we know was of the Holy Spirit. Whatever didn't stick, well, that was all carnal. I was talking to a guy who went to plant a church. He lasted about 2 months, closed it up, and came home. The problem with this is he really believed that he was called, but he had no training, no equipping. It just, you know, it was kind of like, it's kind of the old school way. You're called to start a church, well, here, you know, we'll shake your hand, we'll pray for you, and God bless you. And, you know, you got a Bible in one hand, a guitar in the other, Wanted Dead or Alive by Bon Jovi's playing in the background, and we'll see what happens. But see, here's what happens on the other side when we send guys that are ill-equipped. Is that now, this guy that I was talking to, it's like, did God really even call me? And now, and this is the part that really broke my heart, he's questioning, did I really even hear from the Lord? What my challenge to him was, maybe you did, but this is, the timing wasn't right. Maybe you did, but you just weren't ready. You know, it's like, hey, a guy and a girl can get married and be ready to get married. And it's like, hey, they're a great match. But they can also get married and not be ready to get married. And it's not that it wasn't God's will. And maybe it's just an issue of timing, training, and some things like that. And so that's why I just have a real passion to see us make sure that we're really training guys and getting them ready and then giving them some support. And I'm doing a main session tomorrow. I'm going to talk a little bit more about being supportive of the guys. And Ed touched on it, and I guess I want to talk about it more from the perspective of the guy who's out there. So we'll talk about that. But how do you know that someone has the gifting, the leadership gifting? And one of the things that you want to look at is, do they show it naturally? And Ed talked about this when he talked about assessment. And, I think assessment is a great thing. I think sometimes it can be very mechanical. But I think that we can assess just by getting to know the person. Hey, there's some guys that want to go start churches, and there are guys that have wanted to go, and I've told them, listen, I just don't see it. And if you want to go, we'll let you go. But there's a big difference between being let go and being sent. And what we want to do is make sure we're doing a lot more sending than just, hey, we're going to let you go and plant the church. But you want to look at, do they show natural leadership gifting? I mean, when they were serving at your church, were they people that just, in a good way, assumed leadership? When there was a leadership vacuum, when there was a need for more chairs in the auditorium, were they looking for someone to do it, or were they just the guy that was, hey, we just got to do it, and they got two guys together, and they're getting this thing done? There was an outreach that needed to happen, and instead of somebody scratching there, well, who's going to do that? Well, this guy just took initiative to do it. I mean, this is what we're looking for. That's one of the things that I'm looking for, is a guy that I don't have to call him up and get him out of bed in the morning. Because if there's a guy that's like, I'm looking for like a driven type A kind of person. I mean, they want to get it done. And I think that's one of the things, you can look at that even from the questions that they ask. I'm working with a group of 12 guys right now that I meet with, that come to my office every Tuesday night. Not tonight, but one of my assistants is teaching. But I meet with these guys every Tuesday night. And we're talking through leadership issues, and one of the things that I'm looking for is, what are the questions that they're asking? That's telling me so much about them. They're thinking about not just, my role, but they're thinking about the church as a whole. They're thinking about what this impact of this decision has on our philosophy, of our values, of who we are as a church. I mean, these are the things that you're looking for. You want them to be able to lead without being asked. Not in a rebellious way, but in a responsive way to what God is doing. Instead of just pointing out the obvious, they'll say, hey, Pastor, this is what's going on, but what do you think about this? People that have, there's no shortage. Have you noticed this? There's no shortage of people who are ready to point out the obvious. I mean, we got those, I got those coming out my ears. People that are willing to just point out the obvious. I'm looking for guys that are not, that's like, hey, here's the problem, but here are 3 possible solutions as to what could happen. All right, so that's by way of introduction. Let me just give you three keys, if I can, maybe 3 principles for creating a leadership culture in your church. The first is this: make leadership development a priority. If you don't have a system for recruiting and developing servants, you'll always have a severe shortage. And once again, this is an area of ministry that doesn't just happen. It's not an area of ministry that's going to scream for your attention at first. But we need to be proactive in creating this system to where we're giving people tools and training. I mean, when you think about college, like I am a graduate of the Bible college, so like this is cool to be here. I've never been here, but I've watched hundreds of videos like from right here, guys like Larry Taylor and all those guys, Romans, Ephesians, Galatians, Ephesians, Daniel, Revelation, Genesis, Psalms, all those I took with Larry, and then some classes with John Duncan and some other guys. John Miller taught several classes. I remember his class in Colossians was fabulous. But the whole, if you think about just a college curriculum, right? Think about the college curriculum. Well, now it's in Marietta, but even when it was here, a college curriculum for the Bible college. What is that? That's a system. It's a system for, if you want to graduate, this is what we want you to know. But then you show up and you don't know anything. And what did they do? They reverse engineered it. And they said, we need to have X amount of classes over X amount of time that fill in all of these important issues so that when they leave, they're rounded out, that they know what they believe and why they believe it, and they're ready. That's the whole, and that's the very thing that we want to do in our churches on a leadership level. And, the cool thing about teaching through the Bible is you don't have to spend a lot of time saying, well, we're going to make sure you kind of understand the core beliefs or whatever. You're doing that. You're doing that from the pulpit. And those guys, if they're committed, they're going to be there either way. But what you want to make sure is that you spend some time every year, and this is one of the things that we talk with, and the guys that I train, I talk to them, I say, every year you need to take at least one message a year. Talk about the importance of service and servanthood. Because that's one of the days, and this is what we do. Now this may seem kind of, odd or whatever, but we actually have a card. It's a little bigger than this. It's got a person's name, email, address, all that kind of stuff. And on the back, it just has a box and says, I want to serve. And they can check it off, and they can actually write in the area that they want to serve. And then we have a servant orientation after that. But our goal is we're trying to make it easy for people to get involved. And this is kind of on a very basic level, because we can't get them in a leadership process if they haven't begun to serve. And this is the thing that I had a pastor called me that I've worked with, and he said, would you come and consult with my church? And I said, okay, I don't do that a lot, but I really like the pastor, and he was in Northeast, and I said, yeah, okay. And so I went in, and I said, well, what are some of the things that you're looking for? And he said, well, and he kind of listed 4 or 5 areas in the church that he thought were lacking, and one of them was, we don't have we don't see a lot of people beginning to serve. So I remember going to the service, kind of walked the halls, picked up every brochure that I could, and after the service, him and I met for lunch, and he said, so what do you think? And I said, well, I've been to, and he talked to him in the service about the importance of serving. We want you to get involved. And I said, but here's the thing, you never told me how. And not only that, you didn't tell me how. There's not one piece of literature. Even so, if you're not going to talk about it and tell me how, at least give me like a brochure that tells me how to do it. Set up a table that said, like get plugged in right here, get involved right here, whatever it is. But there was nothing. And that's one of the things that I look at when I talk to guys. If you want to have guys as part of in this kind of leadership track, let's start all the way from the beginning. How easy is it for someone to get involved serving in your church? One of the things in churches that I work with, they show me, well, we have a ministry questionnaire. Okay, how long is it? 17 pages. You can get into Harvard and not fill out that much information. And so, like, what do you need to know? Right? Our ministry questionnaire is 3 pages long. It's got 2 extra pages if you're going to serve with children or youth, and one of them is just a release to do a state and federal background check. By the way, you're only required to do state. You want to do federal also. That's just a little tip. Do with that as you will. But you want to look at that. There's just a simple thing. How do you get people to serve? My whole thing is, if I can just encourage someone to get involved and just start at once every other week and just hand some bulletins out, we can begin the process there. And so you just have to make it a priority. So for us, we want to make it a priority, and then we want to kind of move and begin to give people some training. So if somebody starts and they start their greeting or they're serving in the parking lot, helping people park their cars or whatever. I don't see it as a win for somebody to be like, man, I've been serving in the parking lot for 5 years. Really? Yeah, and I just memorized all of Galatians. Okay, if you're there, let's move you to do something else. So that's, so I'm always thinking of what are the entry-level positions in the church? The positions where, they're not going to stand up and teach. They're not, this isn't like they're going to be speaking on behalf of the church or anything. But what are the entry-level positions? I want to see people move out of those after a season so I can open up more positions open up spots for more people to get involved. And so you start there, and then you begin to kind of to move into the process, because now this is the second thing, and that is identify those with leadership potential. There's only 2 types of people, and I know that sounds very, non-PC, and we have infinite diversity. No, there's really, when it comes to leadership, there's really only 2 types of people: products and projects. That's it. Okay? Products are people that come in. You bring in a guy from another church you feel like, man, God's calling him to come to our church. He comes on staff. He's got 20 years experience in that same area of ministry. He doesn't need a lot of training. He just needs you to cut him loose so he can do what he's equipped to do. The other group are projects. These are people that have leadership potential, but they're going to need the time and training and opportunity to actually really develop that in them. And that's really what we want to, that's what we want to do. And the guys that we raise up, see, for me, church planting isn't necessarily a goal that I have to raise up so many guys to plant churches. I think that's a good thing. But that's not my goal necessarily. My goal is just keep helping people take their next step, whatever that might be. And so for some people, them overseeing our cafe one Sunday a month, that's as far as they're going to go. That's kind of their leadership capacity. And I'm not going to force that. There's this business principle. It's called the Peters Principle. And that is that people are promoted to a level of incompetence. So someone does a great job at position 1, so he gets promoted to position 2. He does a great job at position 2, they move into position 3. He does a great job at position 3, they move into position 4. He does a terrible job, he gets fired. And you say, well, what happened? Well, he got promoted to a level of incompetence. And so our goal is to continue to promote people to where they're continuing to succeed. And so if a person is in a place and they're not doing well, let's throttle them back. It's not like let's throw them away. Let's throttle them back because we want to help them. We want to help them to succeed. The third one is this, and I'm going through these, and I want to leave some time for questions. But and that is create levels of service in your church. There needs to be levels of commitment as people begin to serve, and then as they continue to move along in this leadership development process. And then you have to kind of draw the line as to what is what's most important. And so, like, I'll give you an example. This is like, I was a Calvary guy, called me up, and he said, Bob, I'm so frustrated. And I said, why? And he said, because I've got these people who serve, but they only show up to church on the weeks that they serve. And then they don't show up on the weeks that they don't serve. I said, okay. I said, that's not that big of a deal. I said, it's not like what you've been dreaming about. But it's not the worst thing that could happen in your life. But it depends. I said, but here's the question. What are they doing? And he's like, well, they're elders. And I'm like, okay, now let's put it in park. And so we had to talk that through. Because if it's a person who's a younger believer and they're still working through this, like, I was talking to this kid in our church whose name is Mike. Mike was a totally unchurched guy, came out of a kind of a rave scene, dropping X every week, like really kind of a wild past. A friend of his invited him to Calvary. I gave an invitation. He came forward, got saved. Mike attends church now about every 6 weeks. And now some of us would think, man, the guy really needs to get committed. I talked to him, and he told me that he's been to church 4 times in the last, it was like, man, in the last 4 months, I've been to church 5 times or whatever it was, or 4 times. He's like, dude, I'm like a freak. I'm like a religious freak now. And like some of us would think, like, that dude needs to get committed. Are you sure he got saved? You need to pray with him again. For his perspective, this guy's never been darkened the door of a church in his life. And he's gone to church more in 6 months or 4 months than he had ever been in his other 24 years of life combined. And so it's really just a matter of where they are. So maybe, what if a guy like Mike starts serving? And he's like, now we got him showing up twice a month. Well, now the guy thinks he's like one step away from being a pastor. He's there so much. And so it's just, and once again, it's all a matter of perspective with the person that's serving. Now, if years go by and this guy's been faithful, and now he's overseeing a ministry in our church after, however many years or whatever, and he's overseeing a ministry in our church, and he only shows up when he has to serve, now we have a problem. Because the level of commitment is greater. And this is one of the things that's really important with any kind of leadership development process is, with any kind of position, there always needs to be commitment attached to it. A lot of times, and I would see this happen, is that we would give people titles, but there was no real, we just want you to, hey, we made you a deacon. Okay, well, what do I do? Just keep doing what you're doing. But there was never any commitment attached to that. Instead, if we're moving someone through this process, we want to make sure that there's a commitment attached to that. Because the truth of the matter is that if we don't decide, and this is maybe going to be a little more stringent or whatever, but I really believe that if we don't decide what commitment is in our church, based on what the Bible teaches, people will decide for themselves. So it's this whole idea, well, I show up to church once a month. What do you do the other 3? Well, I have my boat. And, all right, well, when things go south, what are you going to do? Pray to the boat? I hope not. Now's the time to be committed. And then here's the last thing is have a process for developing leaders. And that's what I talk about, this whole idea, single A, double A, triple A, where we are, where we're helping people to make this, to go through, so what does it take? And this is what, we actually went through this exercise in our church. What is a single A position? And what's the commitment level? What's a double A position in our church? And, if you don't like, I'm like just a baseball nut, so I kind of think of life in terms of baseball. And, my wife told me it was silly. I said, you're out. Anyway, joke. So I'm kidding. But we think about that in with everything is, maybe you look at it as a children, young men, fathers. What is a little children area of responsibility in your church? What's a young man responsibility? What's a father's level responsibility? And how do you give training to that, to each of those groups? That's what I'm saying. A lot of times there's this big gap between person who serves chairs or something, and then there's the staff person. How do we get them to that level? And I think there's 3 things that need to happen. You want to raise up guys to go plant churches and do it well? It needs to be 3 things: time, training, and opportunity. Those are the 3 things. Those are the only ways that we mature. The only ways that those of us that are senior pastors that have been doing this for a while, someone gave us time, training, and opportunity. When I started out at Calvary Fort Lauderdale, I came to Calvary. My brother led me to Christ. I showed up there. I'd been a Christian for 3 weeks. And so I stumbled in there on a Wednesday night. I heard Bob teaching the Bible, and I just thought, man, this is just amazing. He was teaching Acts chapter 8. I just remember it so vividly. He's teaching Acts 18. And I remember thinking, like, man, if I come here every week, I could actually know what this whole book is about. And I mean, that is like the coolest thing ever. And then I showed up on that Sunday. He was teaching Revelation. He was teaching at the Church of Ephesus, so he wasn't that far into it. And I thought, man, what a cool thing. If I show up on Sunday, I'll know about this book too. And man, that's the coolest thing. And then as I grew, and Bob was so gracious to give me to give me, time, training, and opportunity. All of those things. I remember the first time I filled in for him. I thought I was going to throw up before I walked out. You know what? Because to me, Bob and I are friends now, and I love him so much. But I remember the first time that I stood behind his pulpit and taught, and it was such an honor to stand behind the pulpit where I had learned everything that I knew about the Bible. But you don't start there. You don't give that opportunity early on. No, you start at the beginning, and then you say, well, man, can you be faithful in this small thing? And I remember the first job they gave me. It was horrible. It was like, well, there's a new believers class that happens at 8 o'clock or 8:30, but we need somebody to come in at 6:30 in the morning. I was 20 years old. I had never seen 6:30 in the morning in my life. I had just finished high school. I was on the 5-year plan of high school. As I like to say, being a senior was the best 2 years of my life. And so I remember, and they gave me this response, we want you to set up chairs, and we want you to get the coffee going for all these new believers, and then we want you to cut bagels for them, and that was my first responsibility. And I did that for a few months, and then, and it just kind of kept moving. But, the thing that happens is, and there it was much more relational. In our context, it's a little more structured. But for us, when we see someone go from a more of a, let's say, entry-level position to maybe something a little bit more, we attach training to that. So for them, there's a small group. Once again, for us, kind of everything is within the context of groups. And so there's a small group that goes for 4 to 6 months that we want them to be part of. And so we're attaching training to that. When they move up to another level, there's more leadership happening. Maybe they're like I said, maybe they're overseeing ushers 2 Sundays a month. We want to attach training to that because we're not assuming that people know how to manage people and know how to oversee people, how to deal with conflict and problems and how to lead people in a godly way. We're not going to assume that. We want to train them and talk to them about that. Then we start getting to the higher levels where people are now leading ministries. They're talking about starting churches. We see potential in them maybe to come on staff at some point, and they're doing some higher level things. And this is where now we're starting to speak to them about philosophy. We're speaking to them about values. We're speaking to them, about what they might be called to do. And within the context of that, and so we're giving them books to read and things to consider, and so at a top level, we'll give them something like Spiritual Leadership by J. Oswald Sanders. Guys that are going to plant churches, we'll give them like lectures to my students, something like that, because there's nothing like giving somebody a book where Spurgeon says, there was a guy who wanted to enter my school, but I wouldn't let him in because he had a long tongue. And he said, I wouldn't let him in for all the gold in Tarshish. And that's just a great line. Someday I'm going to use that. But the point of that, I don't know why I mentioned stuff like that. The point of the matter is that what you want to do is just make sure it's time. It takes time to develop leaders. It takes time to develop church planners. It takes time to develop guys who become staff members and assistant pastors. It takes training. Us train. See, when we just go out and say, "Hey, you're on staff with other church. Why don't you come over here?" They still need a time, training, and opportunity. We're just banking on the fact that somebody else did the hard work. So when we are raising up our own disciples, we talked about this last time in the last session. Bob Coy has this funny story that he tells about when the church in Fort Lauderdale started growing, and he called out to Costa Mesa because he was looking for an administrative pastor. And he got Romaine, and you know that Romaine's a fun-loving guy. And he says, Romaine, I need you got a Bible college student or something that can be my administrative pastor? And Romaine said, make your own disciples, Coy. Click. Which, as you know, is totally out of character for him. But it's this whole thing, it's just like, those are some of the stories for me that really kind of galvanized all of this in my life as we went out. So, I don't want to be the guy that's calling up saying, hi, I didn't take the time to make my own disciples. Could you just send me some of yours? Instead, I want to be the guy that's investing from the beginning. So we're just sending guys. You know what the cool thing is? When you have a leadership development process, and there's a guy on your staff that wants to go start a church, listen, I've had guys, Bill, who taught the last session, the last breakout with me, Bill was our administrative pastor. And I am so grateful that when he said, I want to go start this church, but you know that you have 3 guys that could do my job and could come in and do this no problem. I was so grateful for that, because I also know the flip side of that. There's a guy on your staff and he wants to go start a church, and then he tells you and you're like, oh man, I want to rejoice with you, and I want to, really just encourage you in the fact that, yeah, I confirm that God's doing that in your life, but the truth is, if you leave, it's going to leave a huge hole because, we didn't take the time to develop leaders. And so it's just a huge thing. It takes time, it takes training, and it takes giving guys opportunity. You got to give guys opportunity to lead. You got to give guys opportunity to make bad decisions. That's probably the hardest thing. I'll tell you one. I'll end with this. This is one Calvary Fort Lauderdale story. My area of oversight when I was at Calvary was I oversaw the Bible college, the extension that we had, and we had a couple hundred students there. So that took up most of my time. And then doing premarital, weddings, funerals, counseling, all that. That's kind of like what I did with the rest of my time. But anyway, we were putting together this catalog for the Bible college, for our extension. And so we were taking pictures of the different teachers that were there. And so there was a guy in the church, and he said, hey, I'll do it. I'll just do it. I'll donate my time. So I'll just take care of it for you. I'm like, oh, great. And so, because if it was going to cost anything, we got to fill out check requests and all that. And, Calvary out there is just so incredibly organized administratively. And but he said he was going to take care of it. And anyway, so we do it. We do all these pictures and whatever. And then I get a bill from the guy, and for $900. And I'm like, dude, what kind of pictures were these? And I'm like, but you told me you were going to donate it. And he goes, yeah, I donated my time. But I still had to get pictures developed, and I had an assistant and film and whatever. And anyways, you can tell this is long ago because we're using film and all that. And I'm like, dude, I didn't, you can't just I don't know, maybe people can just spend $900 at your church. People can't spend $900 at my church or when I was an assistant at Calvary. And I'm like, dude, please. And he's like, whatever I can do. I'm sorry, this is just what it is. So I think I got him to knock it down. He knocked off $100 or something. And I had to go into Bob's office with an $800 check request. And he's like, what is this for? And I said, well, we've got these really nice pictures. And, he wasn't real happy. But I remember him signing it, and he said, I told him what happened, and he listened, and he wasn't happy about it. And he signed it. He says, I just have a feeling this is never going to happen again. And I said, so do I. and this is the thing, and I'll tell you, man, I was so frugal for the next 4 or 5 years that I was there. But the thing, and I've told him this many times, that one of the things I'm so grateful for him was that he let me make mistakes, because that's the only way that you raise up leaders. You cannot create this sanitized environment where they just cannot make mistakes. That's not where leadership is forged or built or made. It's just not. It's not what happens. You look at the book of Acts. I feel bad for the guy, but isn't it interesting that Paul circumcises Timothy, and then later on he says circumcision means nothing. It's like, sorry about that, dude. We're growing, it's one of these things where, there's got to be an opportunity for guys to make mistakes, opportunities for guys to take a next step and do things that may not be as good. There may be things that you're doing that you let somebody else do it, and you know it's not, it's going to, the quality, if you want to call it, is going to drop by 30%, because the guy who's taking it over or is going to fill in or whatever, he's not there. He's not where you are. Doesn't have the experience you have. Doesn't have the level of training and all that yet. But yet he has to do it so that he can get the training, because all of us, time, training, and opportunity. Someone at some point gave us all three of those things, and that's how we were able to get to the point that we are as God has led us. So anyway, I am out of time. But I'll take a couple questions if you want, unless you guys want to go take a nap before dinner. Go for it.
Just wondering, can you give any specifics on your training, like what you do? I don't know if you go by levels or what. But
yeah, we do the levels, but
what actually do you do? I'm curious.
That's part of like the culture in our. We talk about single A, double A, triple A. That's like very common speak in our culture at our church. Once again, everything is built on groups.
Okay. Small groups.
Yeah, and so, but these groups are by invitation only. So like, there's a dozen guys that I'm working with. That's all by invitation only. And so I'll spend up through December with this same group that I've been with. And we're going through the J. Oswald Sanders book. We're talking about, there's a couple different tests we have them take that we think helps them. We just had them do, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Strength Finder, which is done by the Gallup organization. And, there's a million of these kinds of tests. What I'm trying to do, I think this is a very good one. But I think one of the things that we're trying to do is help people discern what their strengths are, what they're good at, how God has gifted them, so they can really think through what their next step is. If a guy says he wants to be a church planter, but he doesn't have any leadership ability, just can't do it. And I would say this, and I think this is an important thing also, is that there's a big difference between being a senior pastor and being a church planter. It's like, in a business sense, it's like the difference between being a business owner and being an entrepreneur. They're two totally different skills. There's a guy that I know, he pastors, he's not a Calvary guy, but he pastors a church of like 9,000 people. And he tried to plant a church before that, and couldn't get this church above like 200 people. And then left the church, went on staff at a church as an assistant pastor. The senior pastor kind of began doing like a kind of a parachurch ministry. He took over the church, and the church was running about 3,500, and he's more than doubled the church. So apparently he didn't do that well with 50 or 100, but he can do pretty well with 1,500 to 2,000, because they're just different skills. And so I think part of, at least at that top level training, what you want to do is create some opportunity for conversation for people to really discern where the Lord is leading them. Because I think the specifics in the training come once someone has decided, hey, this is where I think the Lord is leading me. And if you're, hey, I affirm that, then you're going to give appropriate training and opportunity based on that. So at the lower levels, and maybe, I don't know if that's kind of what you were asking, at kind of some of the maybe mid-level, what do you want to do in that? I think some of it is giving guys opportunity. When I'm looking at a guy to be kind of like what we would call a double A guy, which is someone who's overseeing a group of people on a particular Sunday. They don't run, oversee that ministry, but they oversee a portion of it on Sunday. I'm looking for someone at that bottom level, that entry level, we would call it, that is faithful. I'm looking for somebody that is going out of their way, that takes initiative, and then we'll say, hey, let's try this. So it's not a life sentence, but we'll say, hey, let's try this and see how it goes. If it goes well, then we want to just continue giving that person an investment. And the cool thing is that you can tailor it as to whatever you think is going to help them most. So for us, when someone kind of gets to that first level, they're beginning to oversee people, we'll use a book like John Maxwell's 21 Laws of Leadership. That's one of the books that we use because for some people it's like their first introduction into really talking about leadership as a topic and leadership as a subject. Because we talk about leaders, what leaders do, but a lot of people just equate leadership to titles or position. Where John Maxwell's position in the book is that leadership is influence. It doesn't matter if you have the title or not. It doesn't matter if you have the position or not. Leadership is influence, and so that becomes that's a helpful thing. If the guy wants to go more of a church planting direction at the higher level, then depending on the person, it may be kind of moving them to interning with us and then joining our staff. Putting them on a track to leave and plant a church. So there's going to be some different, books and resources that we're going to give them to help train them. So I hope that helps. Yes, sir.
I think you talk about Fort Lauderdale, and I think it's a big church, and I think it's easy if you have a couple of hundred people to looking for potential leader. So we started with 4 people: Jesus, my daughter, my wife, and I. And the first 2 years, people came in, and single moms with a couple of problems, people who are with mental disease, drugs problems. And from time to time, I saw a person who could be a leader, and I trained him. But then they moved to different circumstances, to different towns. Depends on the work they have. And what are you doing if you don't see leaders, or if there are no leaders?
Well, I think where you want to build it is, do you have servants? Start from there. Once again, I'm with you. We start as my wife and I. My wife and I, my wife and I and 5 people. When we started investing in leaders, we didn't have a room of 50 people to work with. It was just a couple of people. In fact, the first leadership training meeting I ever had, it was me and 2 people. Both of those guys ended up on staff at our church. One of them is an assistant pastor with us. The other moved and is now a writer. So what do writers do anyway? But I think but where we began was we weren't looking for leaders out of the box. We were looking, when we began, is who are the people that are committed to serve. Once they started serving, we said, hey, okay, these are the people that we want to invest in, and then look for leadership potential in them.
But if you have a couple of people in the box, but there are no leaders, they could serve. But this is the A level.
Then you got to keep reaching people.
Okay.
You keep reaching people, and you keep investing in people, and then those leaders start to raise up. Same thing if you're saying, I'm looking for somebody to be a worship leader. What do? You start reaching people, and you hope you strike gold with somebody who plays guitar. And the same thing, but the difference is that the talent that we're looking for is a little more latent than overt, like being a musician.
Yeah. Now I have 40 people in the box, but they can only play the CD player. There is no single guy who can play any instrument.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We started. I've been a musician half my life, and so I can sympathize. My buddy Bill, who was here, he started in Hartford. It was him and his wife, and their daughter, and they started, and they were doing CD worship, and then they got fancy, and they started showing like a DVD on the screen.
Yep.
So they had like David, I felt bad for the guy who came in eventually, because he had like David Crowder and Chris Tomlin and Hillsong United leading worship, and then it was like this one guy who had to like follow up, and I'm like, man, I don't want to be that guy. But eventually, he just did what he had to do, kept reaching people, and eventually found someone and began to build from there. Now here's the challenge. The guy that he found turned out to be a nightmare. The guy that came after him is the guy that's been with him now for for a few years. But I think the key is, you know, you just keep reaching people. And as you keep reaching people and seeing people come to the Lord and people come to the church, you know, you find them. And obviously, you just pray and ask the Lord to bring somebody. And that happens too. So I was the worship leader and the pastor. That's why at our church we actually greet. You know, sometimes people are like, hey, let's greet one another. We actually, this day, we still do it in the middle of our service. Because when we started, I would play the songs, and then I would pray, and I'd say, all right, let's greet one another. And so while they were greeting one another, I'd take my guitar off, put it down, I'd turn on my microphone, and then I'd stand behind the pulpit and I'd go, thank you for that time of worship. And then I'd start teaching. So it was kind of like a Jekyll and Hyde thing I had going. But to this day, that's kind of gone on. And I mean, I haven't led worship. I haven't been the worship leader in our church for 11 years. But we still do that same greeting in the middle, just because it's when we kind of the same thing is kind of how we started. So, any other questions, thoughts, comments? All right.
Right here.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Do you do anything special to get people initially signed up for being a servant, and then how do you track them through your
Excellent
levels
question.
your
Excellent
software
question.
package?
We do use software. We use a software called Roll Call, and we don't necessarily recommend. And my feeling with all of these different softwares, it's kind of like the best of the worst. And we've kind of looked at some of the stuff that's really expensive, and we've looked at some of this like the $99 stuff. And the difference between the $99 stuff and the $10,000 stuff isn't that much. Now, they won't tell you when they're pitching you, but it's really not that much. The problem that we have with all of it, every single one of them, it's not their fault. But most of these guys that built these programs, they were all doing it. And when it all comes down to it, it was one guy or a team of people, most of whom attended the same church, and they said, what's the kind of software system that would really help our church? The problem is, if you don't do things just like that church, it's not really helpful. And that's part of the problem. So that, you know, we use a company it's called Roll Call to track all of our it tracks giving, and it tracks what, you know, groups people do and classes and all that kind of stuff, whether people have been baptized or not, and you know, if they gave their lives to the Lord. We track all those things. But I think you get one that you think kind of makes the most sense for you. And we used it because we use all Apple computers in our offices, because, you know, we were led by the Holy Spirit to do that. But yeah, so we use all Macs. So we needed. This was several years ago. You know, 7-8 years ago. We were like, they were the only company that were native to OS 10. So that's why we went with them. It wasn't because we thought it was the greatest. I mean, you know, when you're the only hot dog stand, you don't even have to be that good of a hot dog stand. But I would say, I totally forgot your question. What are the steps, right?
How do you get people signed up, and how do you make sure they don't fall through the cracks?
We make it very easy for people to sign up. Like I said, we have this thing, this card that we give them, this connection card we give them, and we have, you know, we'll talk about it in the message, in the service, and then as we, you know, do some application, we'll say, hey, you'll see that card you got in your bulletin, take it out. Here's what we'll, you know, and we'll talk about different areas of ministry and areas where they can get involved, and we'll say, we want you to sign up right now. And then when we receive the offering, it just goes in the basket as it goes by. We collect those, and then we personally call all of these people, and that's kind of a whole process that we have in that. But so it is. Our goal is we want to make it easy for them to get involved. So it may be a little more difficult for us, but we want to make it a little easier for them. So there's some more like advanced things we've done. We actually have what we call a next step table in our church, where we have someone that has an iPad, and so they just start talking to people. And so there's a lot of things that happen in our resource center and our this next step table that we have. So, hey, are you involved in any ministry? No, you know, I'm thinking about getting involved. And once again, we have a servanthood culture in our church. We've been talking about it all the time. We talk about serving pretty regularly. One month out of the year, we emphasize it. People getting involved. We film videos about servanthood, about people serving. We have people tell their story as to how they got involved, what God's done in their life since they've been involved serving in the church. And so, you know, people tell a story of what happened. They came to the church, and this servant, you know, just totally ministered to me. And so we talk about it from different angles, kind of like what Ed was talking about. We're kind of trying to provoke people to, to good deeds. And so I think probably the biggest issue is finding ways to emphasize it, make it easy for them to sign up, and then you do the work of following up with them and getting them plugged in. And but I think one of the keys is you want to make it so it's not a life sentence. You know, I always say this: it's not a life sentence. I don't offer parole, but it's not a life sentence. So they can change areas of ministries. They can take a break if they want, but I'm not gonna go out of my way to tell them, like, hey, do you want to stop? You know, like if they want to come to us and tell us that, we'll say, hey, take a break, change areas. You know, we've had people serving in our children's ministry for 5 years, and they'll come to us and say, I just got to do something else. You know, and we'll say, hey, we get that. You know, and so we'll move them to a different area of ministry. And sometimes it's like, I still want to serve. I just want to be around adults for a little while. And that's I get that. You know, and but that to me, I think, is the whole thing. We try to do our very best to create a culture where servanthood is a basic thing. You know, serving is something that's very basic. Getting involved is easy. And if they start serving somewhere and they hate it, it's okay. And because once again, our goal is not we're drowning and if you don't serve, it's game over. Instead, what we want to do is say, we want you to serve because we know this is the best thing for you. This is the thing that's going to help you grow to maturity. So that's why we don't have a problem with someone saying, hey, I served in youth and I realized I hate middle school kids. Can I serve in the nursery instead? Yeah, absolutely. So we're trying to keep in contact with them. We call our servants. That's just one of the things we do. It's kind of like a maintenance thing. Call everybody who serves and just ask them how they're doing. Do you still like what you're doing? We do an appreciation thing every year for them and all that. And that's like a big party that we throw, which is a lot of fun. So anyway, I'm like way over time. So guys, thank you so much.